Hey, yo, what is up, everybody? Coach Chad here, the CEO of the Next Level Coaching Academy, and welcome into another episode of the Fit CEO podcast. Today, we got a special one for you guys because I'm literally going to give you information that is inside of the NLCA course. All right. So what you guys are about to listen to is you guys are going to listen to a module that I recorded inside of our NLCA Mastery program that's going to cover very specifically how to create a company budget for online fitness coaching companies. All right. Now, there is a resource that accompanies this podcast. That resource is going to be in the show notes. My recommendation to get most value out of this podcast is to pull up the resource as you're listening to the podcast and follow along. All right. Because the podcast, I'm very specifically going to talk about things that are inside that resource. So like I said, if you want most value on how to learn how to create a company budget for your online fitness coaching program, then go ahead, pull up the resource, follow along during the podcast. All right, y'all, I'm going to stop blabbing. Go enjoy, go learn, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, NLCA Mastery student, inside of this video, I'm going to break down how to create and track, this should say, your company budget. Okay, step number one, creating the budget. All right, I want to go over the double budget concept. All right, so this is a concept that allows you to build a budget based on where your business is at currently, relevant to where your financial targets are. Okay, example, currently my budget is $4K spent and I make $10,000 a month. This allows me to achieve a 60% margin. My target is to make $20,000 a month and spend $8K a month so I can maintain a 60% margin. In this case, you have a $4K budget as your floor, right, for where you're currently at, and you have an $8K budget at your ceiling for where you want to go, which is that $20K. Meaning, if you're projecting to make $20K next month, let me fix this a little area here. Your expenses should land between the 4 and 8K threshold. This ensures that you don't go over your spend or under your spend. Okay. So the double budget concept is creating a floor and a ceiling on how much you can spend. And this is relevant to where your revenue is at currently to where your revenue wants to go. So at this point, you're not overspending, going over your ceiling, or underspending, going under your floor. Okay. So how do we create your double budget? Little note here, you always want your margins between 50 to 65%. Anything below that, and you want to look at the following doc, which is right here, on how you can improve that. And then anything above that, you're sitting pretty, you're looking good, but you probably have budget that you could spend to grow the company, right? Especially if you're at this level, the mastery level. If your profit margins are at like 70, 80%, maybe even 90%. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. But if you're trying to grow the company, which I'm assuming that's what you're trying to achieve here, being in mastery, it means you have room in the budget that you could spend and get it within this 50 to 65% range, which is healthy, but still grow the overall nut, right? Because 50 to 60% of $100,000 is always going to be better than 70% of $10,000. Okay. Let's continue on. All right. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to create that double budget. So number one thing that you're going to do is you're going to take the revenue. So we're going to create the floor first, and then we'll create the ceiling second. So you're going to take revenue from last month, previous month, and you're going to multiply it by your desired margin, and then subtract that amount from your revenue to equal your desired expenses for the floor. Okay. So example, let's say you made $100,000 last month. Let's say that your desired, right, not what your actual margins were, but let's say your desired margins were 65%. So you'll take 100, you multiply it by 0.65, you'll get 65,000. You take 100,000, which was that your overall revenue, you subtract the 65,000, you get 35,000 as your desired expenses from your current results. Okay. So step number two, you need to project next month's results so we can create our spending ceiling, right? So we just came up with the floor, right? So this was the floor. Now we need to come up with the ceiling. Okay. So what you're going to do here is you're going to take last month's revenue and divide it by the end of this month's revenue. Okay. So last month's revenue divided by the end of this month's revenue. And that's going to equal your company's growth rate, is not meant to say January, from last month to now. Okay. So then you're going to take your current month's revenue and divide it by the percentage of your growth rate. and that will get you your projection on what you will achieve next month. Okay, here's an example, and this isn't 100% accurate, right? There's variables, but this is relatively pretty accurate. You'll never get the projection. Projection is a projection, right? So a projection can never be 100% accurate, but it will get you relatively pretty close. Okay, so here's an example. So let's say you made $100,000 as your revenue, not profit, but revenue from February. Okay, let's say at the end of March, so February the last month, March this month, right? Let's say at the end of March, you made $110,000. So what you do is you divide $100,000 by $110,000, and that will get you 90%. Okay, so 0.9. So then you take this month's revenue, $110,000, and divide it by 0.9, and that gets you projected for April to make $122,222 as your projection for April, based on how much you grew the month previous. Okay. Now, once you have this number, now that you have that number, we can create our spending ceiling. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take next month's projection and multiply it by your desired margin. Okay. So then you're going to subtract that number from the projection total. Example, projection for next month, 122,000. Let's say our desired margin is 63%. So multiply it by 0.63. That gets you 76,000 and some change. And then you're going to take your desired revenue, subtract it from this number here, and that will give you 45,000, and that is your spending ceiling. Okay. So in this example, this whole entire example, this is your floor for your expenses. This is your ceiling for your expenses. So at the end of the month, you want to be in between that range. You don't want to be above 45,000. You don't want to be below 35,000. That is how much you want to spend. All right. So you have a ceiling, you have a floor. Very important. I don't know why, but that way of thinking about things and not just having one number really helps me see that, you know, I'm not trying to achieve a certain budget at a very specific number. I have a floor, I have a ceiling. Okay. I should coin that. I think I'm the only one that does that, but it's the way that I think through it. Okay. Breaking down your budget into categories. Okay. So you have your floor, you have your ceiling. All right. But now we're going to break down this into categories. Okay. So now that we have created your floor and ceiling budget, let's learn how to break these down into categories. Okay. So you'll have three main spending categories that we're going to track. All right. You'll have your labor expenses, you'll have your marketing expenses, and then you'll have your overhead. Okay. So labor is defined by contractors and W-2 employees. This should make up about 60 to 70% of your budget relative to, this isn't just general business advice. This is relevant to the coaching space because we don't really have a lot of overhead, right? Our biggest expense tends to be labor and contractors. And then the second one tends to be marketing. Okay. So marketing, which is defined by ad spend, referrals, IG shout outs, anything that you're paying for attention, paying for awareness. All right. So that's 20 to 35% typically of your overall budget. Then you have overhead, right? So softwares, job supplies, miscellaneous expenses. Usually this makes up about 5 to 10% of your expenses. Okay. Note, I don't typically include business coaching and personal business write-offs like health insurance and rent and, business dinners. I don't typically put them in any one of these categories. I kind of just put them all away on their own island. If you don't feel comfortable doing that and you want to put it in a category, you can put it in the overhead category underneath miscellaneous expenses. Okay. Now you want to take your floor and ceiling spend budgets and define how much of each you're going to allocate to these three areas, right? So what is that going to look like for your floor and ceiling budget? What percentage of that is going to go to labor? What percentage of that is going to go to marketing? What percentage of that is going to go to overhead? Okay. I typically keep these pretty stable, meaning from month to month, unless we are choosing to up marketing spend within that particular month. We also typically go off the previous month's allocation as a framework for the next month. So like I said, keep it pretty stable. It doesn't really vary too much. Okay. From there, you're going to take the floor spending budget and multiply it by the percentages you choose for each category to determine the dollar amount. So for example, if you choose 0.6, you'll take the floor spending budget, multiply it by 0.6, and that will give you how much you're going to spend on labor, right? 0.2, if you're going to do marketing, right? And that will give you how much you're going to spend on marketing, right? So see what I'm saying here? Then you're going to do that same thing for the ceiling. So you'll take the ceiling spend, multiply it by the same exact percentages, and that will get you how much you're going to spend if you go to the max, right? It'll get you a range for contractors, marketing, and overhead. So now you'll have a range for the overall company, ceiling spend, floor spend, and now you have a range ceiling spend, floor spend for labor, marketing, and overhead. Okay. Like I said, this will give you a range that you can spend for each of these categories. All right. So now we're going to talk about breaking down this further. Let me pause this super quickly. Okay, so now we're going to cover breaking down the expenses even further. All right, so at this point, taught you how to create a ceiling, a floor, how to create those into categories of labor, marketing, and overhead, how to create a ceiling and floor for each of those categories. Now we're going to break down each of those categories. All right, so each of those categories even further. All right, so before I go back and show you how to do all the math for the subcategories, I just want to show you guys our budgets board. Unfortunately, I can't give you guys access to the budget board because that means I would have to add every single client who watches this into our Monday.com, and that would just not be feasible. So instead, I will just show this. I will go over this so you have an understanding of what this looks like. And then from there, you guys can create your own on Monday.com or a Google Sheet. Okay. So this is obviously a duplicate. This isn't the one that we actually use in terms of like our numbers aren't on here, but this is the same exact process. So what we have is that ceiling target. So we have a ceiling target for revenue, right? And then we have the previous month's revenue. So our ceiling revenue here, previous month's revenue here. If then you would put your desired margin here, and then you would put your ceiling expenses and the floor expenses here. Okay. And then here you can update as you go for current spend. Okay. So you can see how you're doing. All right. And then we break down these categories into weekly, and then we have monthly. All right. So for weekly, we have VA spend weekly, DMer spend weekly, coach spend weekly. I'll talk you guys through how to do that. All right. And then the big kahuna is the monthly spend. All right. So we'll have our VA total monthly expense budget here. We'll have our ad spend budget here. This wouldn't be relevant to you. We have our ads creative. So any additional money that we're spending on people to help create our ads, we'll have a budget here. We'll have our DMer budget here. We'll have our coaches budget here. This is just additional. I pay somebody to do to film our ads. That budget goes here. Miscellaneous spend budget goes here. Peter, who runs our ad, his budget goes here. Estimated closer pay based off last month, that budget goes here. Estimated DMer commission based off last month, that goes here. That's different than this. This is their salary pay. This is their commission pay. VA, there are some cases which a VA can get commission for us, so we put that budget here. We have ambassadors, so we put that budget here. We have someone who runs our email marketing, so we put that budget here. We do IG shoutouts, so that budget's here. Referral budgets is here. We have W-2 employees, so their budgets are here. And then we have the breakdown of the labor, marketing, and overhead, right? So remember how I told you you're going to have a ceiling and you're going to have a floor for each of these. That would go here. And then you can update as you go for the current spend here. Okay. So that's the breakdown of this. That's how this looks. We'll continue to refer to this, but let's go back to our little doc here. Okay. So breaking those expenses down further. So I have the math for each of these. I'll go through it for you guys. So the VA math is you'll take the total hours of your whole entire VA department that are going to be worked in the month. You multiply that by the hourly rate, and that will give you the monthly budget, right? So this is how many hours they're going to work. This is how much we're going to spend. This is the max amount that we can pay for VAs this month. Okay. To find the week, all you have to do is take the total budget, divide it by how many days are in the month, and multiply it by 7. That will give you the weekly budget. The same thing for DMer. The same math equation for VAs is what you would use for DMers. However, if you're going to do a base pay, if you do hourly rate, it's the same equation. But if you're going to do a base pay, it's just the sum of everyone's base pay. So super simple, right? And to figure out the week, what you do is you take that total budget divided by how many days are in the month, multiply it by 7. Easy, right? Very easy. Okay, commission. I always estimate commission for the next month based on what we did for last month, right? So usually commission, as your business grows, like steadily grows over time. So if you just kind of either slightly bump it up or keep it the same in terms of the budget for the previous month, you should be in pretty good standing. All right, for the coach budget, I would do the same thing. I would estimate here based on the last month's total coach payout. If you plan to hire a new coach that month, obviously estimate their pay with the addition of them being added to your roster. But in most cases, it's basically going to be, if you have the same amount of coaches, it will likely be the same or close to the same as what you paid them the previous month. All right, set costs. These are easy to itemize, right? So going back to our example here, Peter is a set cost, right? Austin filming is a set cost. Hannah email marketing, these are all set costs. So the budget never changes unless for some reason they increase their price or I increase the amount of service that I'm getting from them. Okay. Referrals, we usually estimate using the previous months. You know, those like commission, they may go up. They're usually about the same, but steadily they may go up over time. Ads, this is totally based off of your choice, what the budget is going to be. And then miscellaneous spend. So once I'm in here, and my dog just opened that door, so I'm gonna have to pause. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, once everything is added up, right? And I see what the total of all these subcategories, right? On Monday, it'll give you a sum. I see the total of all these subcategories, the monthly one and the salary, right? And I see where that brings us. And then I use my own discretion on what I want the miscellaneous spend budget to be that month based on our ceiling and floor and what the sum of all of these ends up becoming. Okay. So that's how I do the miscellaneous there. Okay. So how do you actually track this, right? So what's the procedure here? So if a staff member on your team is responsible for making payments or tracking ads or payroll, anytime a transaction occurs, they're to update the budget, right? But if that's currently you, then anytime a transaction occurs, you update the budget. And very simply, you can look and see how much you're spending on ads by coming to the ads manager here. And then let's see, how much are we spending? You click this month, update. And then you come over here and it'll tell you how much you're spending. All right. So, you know, every day you can come in here, you can see what you're spending, you can go to the budget and you can update the budget, right? Update the current spend column here. All right. So very simple. All right. So anytime a transaction occurs, you go into the budget and you fill that in. Okay. Now you can also use the sub items here. So for the sub items, you know, you can put the names of the staff members, right? You can do the same thing in here. So for the coaches, you can use all the sub items. Every single coach can have a sub item and you could break it down per coach, which is super nice. You could do the same thing for DMer, right? For ad spend, you know, if you want to update it maybe every 2 weeks, you could say like ad spend by 4-15 and then enter in the ad spend there, right? So there's a lot of little things that you could do with the sub items to make it like super, super organized. But anytime a transaction occurs, right? Like here, I'll give you another example with miscellaneous spend, right? You can put all the transactions that went into the miscellaneous spend budget in these sub items. So it keeps it nice and organized. So yeah, anytime a transaction occurs, you're going to go into the budget. You're going to make sure it's most up to date. Now you, the CEO, until you have somebody who's like completely in control of your finances, which would be called a CFO, you as the CEO are in charge of making sure that this budget is being hit, right? So you're going to have to be good with money. You're going to have to make sure that you check this at least once a week. I do it on Sundays. I look at the budget once a week. I see where we're at. If we're spending too much, I'll pull back. If we're not spending enough, I could push forward. If we're in a good place, we're in a good place, right? So just making sure that you have your finger on the pulse for the overall budget. Okay, what's all this? Oh yeah. Okay, and then one last thing I want to show you guys is at the end of each month, at the end and beginning. So at the beginning of each month, you want to redo this whole budget process. At the beginning of the month, or sorry, at the end of the month, I have this personal little sheet that I keep that has like all my finances on it. But what I do here is I update each month. So this is obviously, just an example, but at the end of each month, I'll take all the data from the budget and I'll plop it on here. So, all right, labor, how much did we spend total in labor? I'll put that amount here. And then what did we end up, right? So the goal is to be between 60 to 70%. What did we end up, right? So that's very simple. You just take the total labor and divide that by the total expenses, and that will tell you the percentage that you ended up, right? So same thing for marketing, same thing for overhead, right? So you do these step by step by step, and then you can put the actual overall margin of the company here, right? So you'd have each individual spend for labor, marketing, overhead. How did you actually end? Did you end within KPI, which these would be the KPIs? And then what was the overall margin for the company you can store here, right? So the reason that's important is because at the beginning of each month, we just wipe this board clean, right? So this board is only for the 30 or 31 days that are in the month. And then we take all the data from there and we plug it in here. So we have an idea of what we spent on labor, marketing, and overhead, what our overall margins were, what the individual margins were, and we could see how those adjust over time or how they trend over time. Okay. So that's really it. That's how to create your budget. That's the process every single month. That's how to track it. That's the budget board. This is an extremely, extremely useful process inside your business. So have at it and let's get it.